Welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking about this one. So this is Welcoming Hera's Blessing, Handfasting and Wedding Rituals by Raven. The last names are my downfall. Kaldera and Tannin and a last name. I'm gonna just, I don't have any idea. So this one might look a little familiar. I had tried to read it last year right before we got married. That didn't pan out, but I finally finished it today. So this book is one of those that I had bought years and years and years ago that initially I had planned for eventually when I would get married to hopefully have as a resource. And lo and behold, I did actually do that. This is one of the main reference books that we had when we got married, and it is truly actually quite helpful. Now the thing is, when you go about planning a wedding, there are many things to keep in mind. I have a few videos on the topic, but basically the other reviews that didn't like this book, the main thing is that this is not a wedding planning book. There are plenty of other books on the topic, they mention that as well. They're really focused just on the pagan aspects of it. This isn't going to necessarily talk about picking vendors, this is not about picking a venue, this isn't really about how to pick a good florist, how to pick a photographer, how to pick a good DJ, and it doesn't really have like a wedding checklist of stuff that you need to go through because there's already other books on that. This is specifically for the pagan aspects of a wedding. And honestly, the pagan weddings that you come across typically don't have a whole lot of the traditional wedding stuff that we see in the modern world, especially like American weddings. Like, I'm sure there's slight differences, like, whatever country you live in and, like, continents, like, obviously there's some changes, but, like, for the most part, modern weddings, typically, you're gonna see the ones, like, where you're gonna have bridesmaids. You're gonna have a beautiful white dress for the bride, and the husband-to-be is probably going to have a black tux or a black suit, and he's gonna have his groomsmen up there. There's gonna be an aisle for the bride to walk up. There's gonna be a reception. There's going to be catering. There's gonna be photos. Like, there's kind of a usual checklist. This book ain't that. There's a couple things like picking flowers with like a magical reason behind them, picking your colors to some degree, but for the most part, this is about the wedding ceremony and like the ritual, pagan ritual involved in the wedding. AKA most of the time, this has to do with the wedding ceremony itself, the vow exchange sort of deal. But there are a few things in here that are outside of that that still kind of fall into that category. For example, there is stuff for if you're a teenager and you're wanting to have a commitment relationship, similar to like a promise ring, but like for a full-blown ritual, but you're not legally binding, and honestly they kind of have like a nice little warning, which is fair, of like, listen, I know that certain states you can get married younger than 18, but like, be very cautious doing that as like the like high priest or high priestess or whatever who's getting approached by teenagers wanting to get married. Just like keep that in mind. Even if they're emancipated, still keep it in mind. And so they have a ritual instead to do where you can give significance to your relationship, but also remember you're minors and it will not be legally binding, and you don't need to have a full-blown ritual of like a wedding when you're like 15. Like, it's a little bit different of a ritual, but I did appreciate that. There's also various things to do, like for including your children, so that if you're like commingling families, they can feel involved, ways to have them included in the ritual. Like, there's a lot of stuff that's not just a typical wedding. And honestly, I really liked that about this book. There is a variety of rituals in here that it's not just for your standard wife and husband to be, which is phenomenal. If you are part of the LGBTQIA+ community, you're covered. Like, there is so much content in here that you usually don't see. There are a few different rituals if you are two men getting married, if you're two women getting married. There's actually polyamory that is included, so if you're having multiple partners involved, there is a ritual for you, because honestly, usually you have to change that. Like, there's a few that are for trans, and it kind of bordered into non-binary. This was written kind of before that movement really took up speed. It has stuff in there, again, the non-binary is not probably as prevalent, but it did have stuff for being trans, because like, there's a lot in the pagan community. We're quite welcoming, and naturally, the communities that are like kind of hated by a lot of the majority of religions, then you find us that's like, I genuinely don't care, dude, it's fine if whatever you want to do and you're not hurting anybody, cool. So like, we just tend to have more of the entire, like, the rainbow crowd over here. And so it was lovely to have such representation. And so this book, it had so many things. Now, I will say the majority of this book does have a slight hinge to it where it's mostly Greek deities. It's kind of expected. Hera. But there are a few others in here. There's some stuff for Druids, for Celtic, and then I was really surprised, and honestly we actually used bits of this for our own rituals when we got married last summer, but there's even Norse stuff. Now granted, for the Norse, because again, that's the like pantheon that's near and dear to my heart, and my husband, and the thing is, they really focused solely on Frigg. And working with these deities, I do wonder why we didn't include Sif, Thor's wife, because she's also a goddess of like marriage, and Frigg is a lot of other things, not just Odin's wife. Like I can see why, but like that was the only myth we really had. And like it's just one of those things that like a lot of pagans love to put the gods into little boxes. I'm not a huge fan of it. And like the heathen ritual that they included was like a little strange. Like it felt weird to be like, okay, we have Frigg, her like 9 handmaids, which I need to look into further because I don't remember reading that in the like a lot of the books, but I know it's a thing, so I just need to find out more about it. Like I need to create like a Book of Shadows binder that's just for keeping track of the gods. Like I'm getting to the point where I might have to branch mine out into different books because it's just getting too big as I'm like adding more stuff. Story for a different day. But we really focus on her 9, one of which is, I think it's pronounced air, but it looks like ear, but like the goddess of healing is one of them. But they have like 9, and then we have Odin, which is like fair. But then we also call on, like you have to have a strong man to represent Thor, and I'm like, listen, maybe, but I don't know, like that's one of those things, like I don't love gendering for that sort of a thing. It's like I don't feel like you could easily have a female stand-in to call on Thor. It's just strange. And then we also have like it has to be a single like beautiful woman to represent Freya. Just stuff like that for the ritual was like not exactly my thing, but again, personal preference. Because for a lot of these rituals, it really comes down to how you want to do your ritual and how involved people are going to be. All of these, I must say, do like basically require an officiant. And like for us, it would have been nice to have more of just like, if you wanted to do a private ritual, just you and your like spouse to be, because that's what we ended up using this book for. We didn't actually include anything from this book in our public wedding. We came up with a vow system with one that I think we'd found online, Frankenstein with a few that our officiant had already done, and just pieced it together. And then we decided to do a variation of one in here, which was the rune blessing. Now, honestly, if you had that many people to be included, that'd be cool. And honestly, like, it's one of those, like, looking back, it'd be cool to, like, switch things up a bit, but we didn't. I kind of would have loved to do that instead of some of the activities that we had done for our wedding. Like, I think that would have been funner, but whatever. It's still one of those, like, crossing the line of, like, how witchy is your public wedding gonna be with only, like, a few of you being witchy-ish? Like, a lot of them really aren't. So it's just, anyways. We decided to take the rune blessing ritual thing, and what you were supposed to do is have people have the runes passed out. Somebody would have created the runes for you, and then they took like a little paper and taped it to each rune, and then people just kind of at random, because it was just easier in the example, for them to read what the rune represents and then put it in like a bowl or something and have that be like a blessing for the family to be. We took that, changed it, so we used that as a ring blessing and put our rings in the middle of our altar and put our 2 sets of runes around, and then we held each rune and like used that as like a blessing for our rings to represent, obviously, our marriage. I do wish there was a little bit more, and like I really wish there had been a ritual of sorts for the partner-to-be that's like going to change their name, because that should be its own ritual in itself if you decide to change your name. Like that, like the numerology books talk about, it's a big deal, and there really wasn't anything like that in here. There was a teensy kind of bit for like the night before-ish, but I wish there had been a little bit more of like preparation and just like acknowledging the change in your life outside of just like vowing to be with this other person, because it really does change your life quite a bit. Like legally now you're bound to this person. A lot of people change their names. Like now you might be moving in together. Like there's a lot of life stuff that happens that I wish there had been rituals to do alongside that. However, that's just personal preference. Everyone kind of has their own things that they want from a wedding book. And again, we did use this quite a lot when we were planning our wedding last year, and I think most witches probably should have a copy of this book, because even if you are married and you end up getting a divorce, there is a ritual for a hand parting. Now, personally, I don't agree with the authors for this section, because they say no matter what, even if the person is abusive, that they should be notified that you're doing a hand parting. No. If they are abusive, if you're in a domestic violence situation, absolutely not do you need to tell them anything. Like that's where like the gray magic in me kicks in, because I'm like, you're defending yourself. Absolutely not. You do your cord cutting, tie, ritual things. You cut them out and you don't need to tell them anything because you're already doing it. If you're getting divorced, the hand parting ritual is part of that. Like, of course, as if you married a witch or a pagan, like they're gonna do a ritual to end it too, duh. But like the fact that they said you still needed to have the abuser notified, they're like, we don't have to tell them where or when. And I'm like, they don't need to know anything. They lost that right when they abused you. Whether it was verbal, emotional, physical, sexual, doesn't matter. If they abused you or your children or your family or whatever, or your pets, they lost that right to know. So that was the only thing that I was like, I don't care. I don't care that you feel like they should still be included. I feel like they lost that right the second they decided to abuse you. And that's just one of those things that it's like, there's a reason I have a lot of like war deities that I work with. That's one of my things where it's like, working with the Morrigan for so many years now, having Thor and Odin, absolutely not. That would not fly in my practice and in my beliefs. And most people I know, like, even if they're kind of weirded out by the witchcraft stuff, to be like, oh, but you still need to tell your abuser. No! Absolutely not. So anyways, if you are getting married, fantastic resource. Even if you're doing like a vow renewal, this would be a good book as well. And really, it's just one of those that it's nice to have on your shelf in the event that you need it. If you have a witchy friend who's getting married, they might need to borrow some notes from here. Like, it is a good resource to use. Even if you don't use it verbatim, it gives you ideas. It's got zodiac, tarot, like there are a lot of rituals in here. You could probably find at least one or two that you could combine, Frankenstein them together, and make a ritual for your wedding. I would love to hear your thoughts on this book in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you'd like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.